How are you, Joe?
Wonderful. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's exciting to have you here, man. And it's obviously an exciting time for you. Presidential campaign is up in full swing.
Last week, Bernie Sanders was on the Joe Rogan podcast. And while I was watching it, there were some claims that he said that I actually wanted to look up and see if they were accurate. So what I'm doing in this video is I'm fact-checking Bernie Sanders and the things that he said on the Joe Rogan podcast. If you want to watch the entire podcast, it'll be linked down below. I'm just going to show a few clips here and there. So let's just get started with something that I actually agree with him on.
Do you get frustrated by the time constraints of the debates?
Absolutely. You shouldn't even call them a debate. What they are is a reality TV show in which you have to come up with a soundbite and all that stuff. It is the meaning. It's the meaning to the candidates, and it's the meaning to the American people. You can't explain the complexity of healthcare in America in 45 seconds. Nobody can. These are not radical ideas.
Well, let's take these one step at a time, because you mentioned a lot of important things there. Let's go with the minimum wage thing. Now, the argument that I've heard about the minimum wage being raised to $15 an hour is that they're entry-level positions for high school kids, for people that are just getting their feet wet in the marketplace. They're learning how to work. They're making some money after school. That if you charge, or if businesses have to pay $15 an hour to people like that, to entry-level people, that they won't be able to stay open.
Well, first of all, they will be competing against, if you're a business and I'm a business, and both of us have to raise our wages at the same level, we both have the same burden. So it's spread across.
Now, I don't really understand what Bernie was trying to say here. It doesn't make sense. It seems to me that they're talking about minimum wage, and that if minimum wage is a burden on your business, then that's okay, because it's also a burden on the next business over. I'm not picking apart his words. I just don't understand what Bernie's trying to say here, where he says that it's a burden that's spread across everybody. If everyone is suffering as business owners because they can't pay $15 an hour, I don't understand how that is a good thing. Again, I'm not trying to attack him or anything for this. I just truly don't understand what his point is here. That being said, let's actually jump into the real part about minimum wage. And remember what Joe Rogan said. What his question was what do you say to people about the teenagers working at McDonald's who probably will lose their job? So this is how Bernie responds.
That is what my conservative colleagues will tell you. The truth is, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, that while it certainly is true that young people do work at McDonald's and the minimum wage jobs, a significant and majority of the workers are not kids. They are often, and I've met them at McDonald's, they are workers who have children themselves. When we work very hard to raise the minimum wage at Amazon and at Disney, we put pressure on both of those companies, and they did the right thing. And when you talk to the people at Amazon who got that raise, these are not kids. These are people in their 30s. These are ordinary adults who cannot make it on 12 or 13 bucks an hour. So I think the argument that, they're old kids is not really quite accurate.
So here I kind of feel like Bernie is being really disingenuous. Rogan asked him, what about the teens who are, for instance, working at McDonald's who will be priced out of the market? And Bernie's response to that was, not everyone who works at McDonald's is a teenager, which, for what it's worth, I fact-checked it right here, and that's technically true. About a third of them are teens, and if you include up to 24 years of age, then it's about 60% of them. But that's not the question that was asked. So let's actually look at youth unemployment and see how it's affected by minimum wage laws. So I have here a survey where they surveyed economists in the United States, and about 3/4 of them agree that in general, a $15 an hour minimum wage is not a good thing. They opposed it. Specifically, however, 83% of them agreed that it would have a negative impact on youth unemployment. 76% agreed that it would have a negative impact on jobs in general. So to point out the failings of this particular survey, it was only 166 economists who were surveyed. So it's not a very large sample size. Nevertheless, I still feel like it's a good piece of data to go by, because the vast, vast majority of these economists think that it's going to have a negative impact on youth employment, which we can see there have been a fair amount of studies done where they've shown that that is in fact the case. That the faster the minimum wage increases, the higher the unemployment rate is for teenagers. However, it is also the case that it disproportionately affects Black or African American teenagers. So those who are minorities are most adversely affected by minimum wage laws. Now, I understand the reasoning behind minimum wage laws, that they want to help people out who are, for example, single parents working 2 jobs trying to make ends meet. But you're helping them out at the expense of teenagers who, again, are disproportionately Black and minority. So I would like to kind of relate that to the left's view on voter ID. As I talked about in a previous video, which will be linked right here, there are many on the left who don't even want to consider voter ID laws because, for some reason, they view them as racist. And the argument basically goes, these voter ID laws will disproportionately affect minorities, and so it's a racist law. So my response to that is then, are minimum wage laws also racist? Because we just saw they disproportionately affect minorities. Now, he also talked about Amazon and Disney, who have raised their minimum wage. I couldn't find anything about Disney here, but Amazon, after they raised their wage to $15 an hour, guess what happened? Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon, had to cut hours. So essentially what happened is, sure, they got a minimum wage, they increased their hourly wage, but Whole Foods cut their hours, so most individuals working at Whole Foods didn't really see much of an increase in their salary. And this is from The Guardian, who tends to lean left. So here we can see that minimum wage laws certainly do have negative effects. But Bernie chose to kind of disregard the real question and answer what he wanted to answer instead, which didn't address any of this information here.
For example, we can start on healthcare if you'd like. Is the idea that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege, a radical idea?
I don't think it is.
It's not. And the truth is, we are the only major country on earth. Many people don't know this. We're the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people as a human right. And yet we end up spending almost twice as much per capita on healthcare. The function, and you can argue with me if you want, but the function of the current healthcare system is not to provide quality care to all. It is to make tens of billions of dollars in profit for the drug companies and the insurance companies.
Now, it's kind of been a staple of Bernie for quite a long time, actually, to talk about how we're the only country or the only major country in the world who does not have universal health care. So he said it many, many, many times. I'm sure I'd be rich if I had a nickel every time he said it. Same with human right, which he pronounces kind of funnily. But the point is that I decided to actually look at this. And believe it or not, he is actually correct here. If you can't see this, it's an image where it shows a map of the world, and every country that has some form of universal healthcare is highlighted in green. And most of the countries we would attribute to being a first world country is in fact in green. So here I have to admit that he is correct. We are the only major country in the world that does not have some form of universal healthcare. That being said, I want to make a distinction between his policy and universal healthcare generally. So Bernie Sanders' policy is essentially a single-payer healthcare, and that is not synonymous with universal healthcare. There are many countries in the world that have universal healthcare but do not have single-payer. When I say single-payer, what I essentially mean is eliminating private insurance. So Bernie Sanders' plan, for all intents and purposes, will eliminate private insurance. If you don't believe me, here's a quote. It's from an email where they were talking about it. And it says, that means boldly transforming our dysfunctional system by ending the use of private health insurance except to cover non-essential care like cosmetic surgeries. So Bernie's plan specifically says you cannot have private insurance if you have coverage already under Medicare for all. So you cannot double down on service. You can only have private insurance for things that is not covered by Medicare for all. So again, essentially, it eliminates private insurance. So he is correct. Basically, every country in the world does have universal health care, but that does not mean they have a form that is similar to Bernie's proposed Medicare for all plan.
And it is clear now that most people, to make it into the middle class, are going to need a higher education. That's college, or maybe it's technical training in order to become a skilled worker. It is insane to me to deny working class people and lower income people the opportunity to get that education because the cost of college has soared. So all that I say is that 100 plus years ago, the American people said that we should have free public education. I went to a public school. My parents didn't pay a nickel. Went to kindergarten. I went through the 12th grade. Pretty good education in Brooklyn, New York. All that I'm saying is the world has changed, and a high school degree is not good enough anymore. So expand that concept through college.
Now, I take issue with the talking point that is basically said on both sides now that everyone needs to go to college. That if you don't go to college, you're going to be poor and things are going to suck for your life. Now, it's certainly true that the median income for a college graduate is certainly higher than the median income for someone who doesn't go to college. I'm not disputing that. But when you look at the actual data, the problem is not people going to college versus not going to college. The problem is that we're essentially pushing everyone to go to college, and that's inflating the market. So what you see on the left-hand side is that 62% of people who are working with college degrees actually have a job where that degree is required. So that means that there are essentially 38% of the US population who are overemployed for their job. So my question is, why are we pushing everyone to go to college when there are these 38% of people who have gone to college but didn't need to go to college in order to get their job? Furthermore, you find that on the right-hand side, only 27% of people who graduated college and have a job are actually working in a job closely related to their major. So again, why are we pushing everyone to go to college here when only 27% of them are working in a degree or a field related to their major? To me, that kind of just doesn't make sense.
Now, guess what? 50 years ago, do you know how much the University of California, a very great university, cost in terms of tuition?
How much?
Virtually free.
What's it now?
I don't know, but it's pretty high. It is high. It's thousands and thousands of dollars. So you had great universities like the University of California, City University of New York, state colleges all over this country, where tuition was virtually free. And then what happened? For a variety of political reasons, states and the federal government started cutting back on higher education and put more and more burden on the student with higher and higher tuition, which is where we are today.
Bernie Sanders said that the reason tuition has been going up is because of a lack of funding. He specifically said that federal and state governments have cut funding, and so tuition has increased. And if you were to look at something like this from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, where the headline is funding down, tuition up, you would say, yeah, that is the case. These guys are claiming that funding has decreased. And as you scroll down, you're going to see images like this, where there are a lot of big, scary red bars showing that funding has gone down. So on its face, it would appear this is accurate. However, it's not. The problem is that he was just talking about state funding. When you include federal funding, you find that, in fact, federal financial aid is up, but state aid is down. So the question then is, has overall funding gone down because state funding went down, or has it gone up? So let's look at that. The top line is state funding, and down below we have federal funding. So it kind of is difficult to see because you have a lot of different lines going on. So if we just look at the years from 2000 to 2012, federal funding for higher education has increased by $40 billion. At the same time, state funding has decreased by $7 billion. So that is a net increase of $33 billion essentially over the past decade. So it seems to be that it's not a problem with just funding in general. That being said, total funding is still up. However, in that same time period from 2000 to 2012, tuition has also increased by 38%. So funding has gone up, but tuition has also gone up, which contradicts Bernie's statement because he specifically said state and federal funding has been cut, which is not accurate, and because of that, tuition went up, which is accurate. But the reasoning he gave does not hold water. One thing I do want to point out is that in this time period, attendance has increased by 45%. So what that means is that even though total funding has increased, funding per student, which we see here, has in fact gone down. But again, that is still not the same as cutting funding. That is a completely different issue. The issue is that attendance is increasing at a faster rate than funding has increased, but that's not the same as removing funding. I personally believe a larger problem than just funding is the availability of student loans. As we see here, the cost of student loans has increased dramatically from 1990 to 2000. Here we have 2013. So because everyone can get a loan, everyone can go to college, which is why college attendance has increased by 45%, which means that colleges can continue to increase their tuition because students are still going because it's being paid by loans. So here, Bernie Sanders is incorrect. He claimed tuition went up because funding went down, and that is only true if you look specifically at state funding, but do not take into account federal funding as well. Just to emphasize that a little bit more, I have here an article from the New York Times where they looked at funding for higher education from 1960 onward, because I only looked at the past 2 decades, and they found that in that time period, for example, military budget has increased about 1.8 times, whereas funding for higher education has increased by more than 10 times. So once again, Bernie is wrong about this claim.
And while you're on bankruptcy, and I should have mentioned this before, when you talk about the healthcare system, 500,000 Americans every single year go bankrupt because of medical bills that they can't pay.
Here, he says that about 500,000 Americans go bankrupt because of their medical bills every year. So I believe he is referring to this source where I found, and they essentially just surveyed people who had gone bankrupt and they tried to find out why they went bankrupt. So what you do here is if you include medical expenses and medical problems causing work loss as reasons for bankruptcy, you add those together, then you get this number here of 67%. So about 67% of people who go bankrupt say it's at least in part because of medical bills. And that is equivalent to 530,000 Americans every year. So looking at that, first off, that's a pretty high number, and I think we can all agree that that is not acceptable, that needs to go down. We can't have 500,000 people going bankrupt every year from medical bills. That seems dramatically high. But I do not think it's an accurate claim to say that all of these people went bankrupt because of medical bills, because here they just said that they either agree very much or some would agree that it was a part of the reason. That does not mean that without it, they would not have gone bankrupt. So I think you need to quantify more explicitly why and how they went bankrupt. Let me give you an example. So suppose that you are the average American and you have a car, you have a mortgage, and you have some form of medical bills. So the average car cost every month is apparently $430, and that is an absurdly high number. I don't know why anyone's paying that much for a car. That's almost as much as my mortgage. So if you're paying that much, you need an older car. For a house, it's about $1,000 mortgage, which is also fairly high. But for medical bills or insurance or anything like that, it was about $100. So just to be on the safe side, I have tripled that number to $300. So when you compare these three prices, which you have to pay every single month, if you had a medical bill that was $300 a month, yeah, that's a lot of money. But can you really claim if you go bankrupt that that was the reason why you went bankrupt? The additional cost may be more difficult, but I do not think it's accurate to claim that if this individual went bankrupt, it's because of medical bills. Because if you look at the other things that they spend $1,400 on compared to the $300 of medical expenses, it's not even close. So this is just a general example where I'm trying to show that I don't think it's accurate to claim that all of these 530 people went bankrupt because of medical bills, which is what Bernie Sanders did. You would have to look at how many of them would have gone bankrupt without the medical bills anyway.
One last question. If you got into the office and you found out something about aliens, if you found out something about UFOs, would you let us know?
Well, I'll tell you, my wife would demand that I let you know.
Is your wife a UFO nut?
No, she's not a UFO nut. It's just, Bernie, what is going on? Do you have any access to the records?
You don't have any access?
I don't. Honestly,
No?
I don't know.
Okay. You let us know, though?
All right, I'll be on the show. We'll announce it on the show. How's
Please.
that? All right,
Please
you got
do.
it. Jerry.
Now we come to the last thing I want to fact check, which is obviously a bit of a joke, but hear me out here. So first off, I don't think that if Bernie became president and learned about aliens, he would actually tell us about it, because the government wouldn't let him. The president does not have all power to say whatever he wants. And second off, perhaps most important, if there were aliens that the United States government knew about, and the president specifically, don't you think Trump would have told us about it already on Twitter? I mean, the guy has talked about literally everything else on Twitter. He's been there for 2.5 years. If he knew about aliens, the rest of the world would know about it by now too. To me, that is probably the best evidence we're going to see that there are no aliens. Or if there are, the president just doesn't know about them. All that being said, if Bernie were to change his slogan to "Let's see them aliens," I think I'd have a really hard time not voting for him. Because let's be honest, that would be probably the best slogan that any presidential candidate has ever had. So I hope he does it. That would be awesome. We should start a petition and ask him to do it. So these were all the times I wanted to fact check what Bernie Sanders said on this podcast. I hope you appreciate it, and I hope that you learned something from it. Just because I didn't cover something that he said here doesn't mean that he was right about it or that he was wrong. It just means I didn't have time to go through everything that he said and respond to it in this video. So I hope that you enjoyed it. Again, if you've made it this far and you appreciate this content, go ahead and subscribe and let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Have you already seen this podcast? If you haven't, do you think you're going to go watch it now? I would actually suggest that you do, because to me, it was actually an informative podcast. So it's going to be down in the description below, and just let me know what you think about this in general. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.